So did you take your oil paintings onto other galleries? Was that sort of the next step?
As creative people, regardless of what field you're in, whether you're an actor or a writer or a musician, fine artist, whatever it is, at least part of your outlook should be talking about the times you live in.
Hi, I'm Catherine Story. I'm here with Jorg Dubin.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks.
I love your little wonderful studio.
Oh, thank you.
I'm just so really excited to share you with the people that know me, and many of them know you.
Yeah, you do.
I mentioned earlier that I've known you for like at least 30 years.
I would say 30 plus. I'm going to go with that.
I think you're right with the 30 plus. And I met you, and you were an artist, as you are.
Yeah, I actually came to Laguna in 1976, and at the time I was a full-time ceramicist, and there was a really vibrant, healthy craft movement happening in Laguna at the time, along with painting, but I was drawn because I knew several of the people in the community, including my former high school ceramics teacher who lived here. And when I came, there was, ceramic studios all over Laguna and people's backyards and garages. There was wood shops. There was metal workers. There was, glass blowing. There was all that was happening like all over town. It was just very vibrant. And so I was a young guy back then. I think I was about 22 when I moved here. It seemed like the place to be because the art school was here, but it hadn't been accredited yet. But they had a great ceramics department here, and I got to know the two gentlemen that were teaching there and learned a lot from both of them. And it was affordable. I had an apartment for $325 a month, and I had one of these spaces here for $175 a month. So for $500, basically, I could live and work in Laguna and be around all these other very creative people, eccentric people, interesting people, and so that was the draw for me to come here back then.
So it really, at that time, Laguna really cultivated young artists and that energy.
They did, because it was still a very eclectic environment. It was always had this sort of bohemian vibe to it. There was a really great, healthy gay community here that also had a lot of vitality and interest to the place. And I think for a young person like myself, coming here and getting involved in the festivals and being around other highly creative people, it just seemed like kind of paradise back then,
Right.
Of course, a lot has changed over the last 4.5 decades.
You were a ceramicist, and I know you as a painter.
Right.
Painter.
So I got turned on to ceramics when I was in high school, and I went to Corona Del Mar High School, and fortunately there was a really great teacher and ceramics department there. So we learned, not only the art of making pots, but we were also learned how to build kilns, learned how to mix our own glazes. It was a very hands-on environment, and it was really the one thing that kept me in high school, because everything else bored the shit out of me. I guess I didn't swear well.
Right.
So from my first year there, I was really fortunate to have been exposed to that great environment, and I just had sort of a natural aptitude for it. So it became my occupation after high school.
So were you making a living selling?
Yeah, I started, because it was pretty early on that there was street festivals going on for crafts people, and whether it was up in LA or around here or out of state, you could, as a sort of a gypsy crafts person, you could sort of, there was sort of a circuit that you could get into, and travel around and do these craft fairs and actually make a modest living doing it. So right out of high school, kind of, I didn't have very good grades, so I did get into a state college, and I went up and visited. It was up in Humboldt State, actually. Mm-hmm. And I went up and checked it out, and at that time, I already had kind of my own little ceramics business going on, and I looked at the program there, and I thought, I'm not going to really learn much coming here, so, and I wasn't really aware that there were places in the country that would have been great places to go to for what I was interested in. Kansas City Art Institute for one, Alfred University back in New York, and a few other places, some places in San Francisco where there was a real vibrant environment there with people like Peter Bulkus, Claremont with Paul Stolmer.
I'm surprised you wouldn't have known about Claremont because it's so close. Like,
it's
a different time, right?
It was a different time, and I wasn't being pushed towards doing that. So I was sort of on my own role in terms of what I was doing, and I thought, well, I'm just going to go out and be in this world. I'm going to show my work, maybe get into some galleries.
Did you ever have a
job?
Real job?
I never did. I worked. I worked at a couple of production pottery places. One was in the unincorporated part of Santa Ana. It was called Santa Ana Heights, which is over by the airport, which is now at the end of the Back Bay, and now it's been incorporated into the city of Newport Beach. So it's completely different than what it looked back then. But yeah, I worked at a couple of production pottery places for a while, and then kind of just worked my way into my own little business and just went on from there. And so I was fortunate then, and I feel very fortunate now that for almost 5 decades, I've been able to be in a creative environment, and I've never had to work at a job to support my creativity.
That's amazing.
So, and it's, I feel very, very fortunate, and I've tried, through teaching and other things to give back to younger people who, would love to have lived this kind of life, but most of them, because I've been able to develop a lot of different skill sets along the way, that's allowed me to support myself, whether it's more commercial art ventures, being able to weld and be woodworking and ceramics and painting, and I play music. It's like all that stuff sort of adds up to allowing me to maintain this kind of lifestyle.
Like a true bohemian, right?
Kind of.
If you think about it, because when I met you, you were in a band.
Yes.
Which was wonderful.
Yeah.
And then I was just thinking about it. You were showing with Peter Blake.
Yeah, 18 years.
With that gallery over there, his first one, and it was the fire.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's my first sort of foray trying
to painting. Yeah,
really. I'd always dabbled, but I was trying to find the right medium for me. Like I started with watercolors, and I found that they were too restricted. And then I tried acrylics, so I didn't like the way they looked or how they handled. And the minute I found oil paints, I went, yeah, this is good.
So how many years since, how many years on was that when you finally found?
Well, I was painting in the late 70s watercolors. And I would say by the mid 80s, I had found oil paint.
And you're self-taught, right?
I'm pretty much entirely self-taught, except I spent in 95, 96, somewhere around there. I had gone over to the art school here and to see a faculty show. And there was a gentleman whose paintings I just completely gravitated towards, and I thought, this guy knows all the stuff that I need to know, because I'm struggling, trying to figure out how to use this medium and how to make paintings. I had no idea. You could look at books and read instruction and stuff, but it doesn't do the same thing as having a live person, And his name was Stephen Douglas, and so I spent a year and a half just auditing his classes. I wasn't officially enrolled, or just kind of sneaking in there.
Right.
And we became friends, and he taught me a lot about oil painting. So it sort of freed me to then be able to continue forward on my own pace. So that was a real invaluable period of time for me to be around somebody who, through his own discovery process and his own learning methods, had taught himself traditional aspects of oil painting, but then was able to use those tools to become a more contemporary figurative painter. So, and he thought, once he demystified the process, and then when you quit being afraid of making mistakes, then it just opens up the door, and that's what happened to me. And that was in about later 92, so about 25 years.
Well, and then I know you've also done sculpture. You've done many things, but did you take your oil paintings onto other galleries? Was that sort of the next step?
Yeah, I mean, I had some representation in Los Angeles for a while. Of course, I was with Peter for 18 years. That ended when he focused on minimal abstraction, which was always his passion. And so I think myself and one other artist were the last of the people doing kind of realist style thing. And that ended in about 2010, I think it was, maybe 2011. And so, I continued to make work and live in Laguna, but I don't, up until the last couple of months, I haven't had any representation with what I consider my own blog. And until Andrew Myers opened his space and invited myself and Mark Gehry.
So why do you think that is?
I think, after my relationship with Peter ended, there was a couple of dealers in town that I felt like, maybe I could, trade an association with. And after, going to meet with them, I was pretty soundly and roundly rejected from them representing me. And the reason is that they had built a client base that was, one of them basically told me I sell nostalgia, and your work just doesn't go there, And my work, you've seen my work for a long time. It's content driven. It's about politics. It's about social and environmental issues. So it can be it can be a little off-putting to people, and I think most dealers at least in Laguna Beach, they just can't sell that kind of work. It's people are buying. Most people buy art to decorate their homes. They don't buy art because they're collecting art, and so they want stuff that just makes them feel good. That doesn't force them to think about anything. That they can just come home from a long day at work and see these beautiful paintings or sculptures that don't offend them and don't force them to contemplate, the issues of the day, so to speak, so, and I understand that. I mean, there's an economic equation to running a gallery, and you can't put work in there for 30 days because you're trying to make a statement. You actually need to sell stuff. And if they feel they can't, they just can't. So there hasn't been a dealer in town since Peter that was willing to show that kind of work. And now with Andrew, he's only been open, I think, for 4 or 5 months, and he's the first person with a gallery, a commercial space here in Laguna that offered to show some of my work. Now he's not showing my, more controversial stuff, but at least he's taken the chance to show some of what I do, which I appreciate.
Do you paint to express that part of you? Because, as you just said, possibly if you were more commercial, you would be hanging in more galleries. So what's that about?
Well, I think part of it is that because of all my different skill sets that I have, it frees me up a little bit to make work that I feel is important, at least for me, to express the ideas. I have this really firm belief that as creative people, regardless of what field you're in, whether you're an actor or a writer or a musician, fine artist, whatever it is, that you should, at least part of your outlook should be talking about the times you live in. And I think if you go back in history and look at times when there was either great social upheaval or maybe war or whatever it was going on, territorial disputes or clash of religious ideas, that there was always writers and visual artists who were right there with the politicians and the dictators and whatever, who were writing the manifestos, who were visually creating the images of what this change looked like, and I have a really strong belief that, whether my work ever gets recognized in my lifetime or not, that I want to leave a document behind through what I do visually that says something about the time I was here on planet, and who knows where all this is going to end up. It may end up in the dumpster at some point. I don't really know, but I just feel like it's sort of part of the prerequisite of being a creative person, that you need to say something and be about the time you're living in, and you can still do the other stuff, you can still do the more commercial stuff to support that, which I do through, other types of commissions that I get. But I think I don't see enough of that around here. I think we're kind of provincial. We're kind of in a bubble. Artists generally are playing it really safe here because of the economics, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I can't speak for anybody else, but I don't diminish the need for creative people to make a living, and that making a living for them means they paint seascapes or they make sculptures of sea mammals or whatever it is. I mean, it's totally fine. I mean, more power to them if that allows them to lead their version of a creative life,
Right.
But for me, whenever I've made the attempt at making something that I think the public is going to like, it's such a fail for me. It's like, but it's not good work. I feel like I'm forcing something that isn't who I'm about.
So where do you think that comes from?
I don't know exactly. My parents were both academics, and one of my sisters was a high school art teacher. That was her career, and so she was. I always thought when we were little kids, she was the creative one because she was always doing stuff and making little drawings and fun things. And I always thought, wow, I don't know where that's coming from, but I was always kind of impressed with her creativity.
Well, you can pretty much do anything, though, George.
Well, I look at myself and I say this to people and with different degrees of response, but I always tell people I'm a journeyman artist. And if you sort of look at what that up in the dictionary, some people go, no, that doesn't apply to you. You're more than that. Because a journeyman is like a tradesperson who knows how to do a lot of stuff. Whether it's fixing cars or working in a factory or whatever, so I always say, look, I know how to do a lot of stuff. I don't know if I do any of it on like that high level. Like I watch a lot of documentaries on creative people who came from maybe nothing or hard lives, or maybe they came from a creative family that those people do were just sort of blind to it. But the people who achieve that, like that godlike status,
Excellence,
they're so driven, and they're driven by one singular thing to become the best at, And I don't know if I've ever had that drive. I question it a lot of myself. Because I can do a lot of stuff. I can do a lot of stuff at an okay level. But I don't know that there's one thing that I do where I see myself in the same light as some of these great.
But you can do many, so we were just speaking about, because 9/11's coming up, and you did the memorial here in Laguna.
Yeah.
Like, that's pretty freaking amazing.
No, I mean, it was, well, first of all, it was an amazing honor to be chosen to do it. And, taking the city had brought from New York, they saved a bunch of the material at JFK to study for like 10 years. And they released it to any of the fire departments around the country that wanted an artifact from the site. And so one of the captains here arranged to have two of the pieces of I-beam brought here, and then the city had a design competition, which I ended up winning. So that's sort of how it came about. But it was such an interesting, because I had a very short period of time to do. I had about 3.5 months to start to finish.
Wow.
A very, very low budget. But I had these two I-beams here, pieces of those buildings, and it was like, it was intense. It was like every day I'd go look at them, and I just think, these were part of that structure in New York. Like, I don't know what part, but I mean, so they were sort of like these sacred objects. Yeah. And guys from the fire department would stop by and watch the progress. And then the last part of the installation was all in the park where the site is. And it was about probably 2.5, 3 weeks of every day working over there, and people coming by asking what it was about. And it was really interesting because, of course, everybody had a story about that day, like where they were, or they knew people who worked in the building, or they used to work in the building, or they used to live nearby. It's like everybody had a story, and it was really pretty fascinating to meet people while I was, working on this memorial. And so yeah, and that was installed in 2011. It was the 10-year anniversary, and now we're at 2023, so it's.
What about that other one you did? You had it done abroad somewhere.
Yeah, so in 2017, a friend / collector friend of mine here in town, Michael Ray, who
yes,
his brother and their partner decided to do an apartment complex in Irvine, California, and they wanted the architecture to be different than all the other stuff that's being built over there. And the second part of it is because Michael's a big art collector and has been a big supporter of the arts here in town. He wanted to do a landmark sculpture for the building to really set it apart from everything else there. They weren't required to do it. It was something that they elected to do. And so he asked me in late 2017 if I had any interest. And of course, I'm like, yeah, I do, So I went through probably 20 or 25 different iterations of this piece before they finally arrived at where they went, yeah, that's the one. And it started a lot smaller than it ended up. And they kept thinking, if we're going to do this, let's go.
How big is that?
It's 60 feet tall. It's 5 stories tall. And
that's incredible.
Yeah. So it starts on the roof of the building. It looks like if you had
a drop or something.
Well, it looks like if it was a pool of mercury, liquid mercury, that was spilling off the roof and streams down, hits the ground with a big splashing flow. So they finalized the design, and it had a decent budget, but it was first of all, the piece was too big for me to make myself.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the space. So there are studios around the country that do sculpture fabrication for artists. Mm-hmm. And I started reaching out to a few of them. And when I told them how much the budget was, they either just hung up and they go, man, you're like $500,000 short.
Wow.
So I was sort of stuck for a while trying, because the developers were saying, that's what we're willing to spend. So you either make it happen or we're just not going to do it. So I ended up finding a sculpture fabrication studio in China. And so I got fabricated there and shipped over. And it was supposed to be installed in 2018, and the building had a lot of delays and a lot of issues. It was a really big project for them. 385 units.
Wow.
So it's big. And so by the time they finally got it done and they finally got their occupancy permits, that's when they decided to install the piece. So it got installed September of 2012. So it had been sitting in storage for almost 40 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
In China?
No, it was here in the States. Several different locations. I kept getting.
So is there a piece like, okay, this is probably like asking who's your favorite child, right? But like, is there something in your career, the history of your career up till now that really like stands out for you?
As far as something I did, or?
Yeah, as far as like just a turning point for you, or like a piece that just, came out like amazing, like just something that sticks in your, stands out in your mind.
I've had probably several moments like that, and I know with especially the last few exhibitions I had with Peter, they were just, for me, they were probably the strongest shows I had, at least here in Laguna.
There are young artists right now that are obsessed and are doing it 7 days a week that aren't making it. Like, what would you?
Well, when I was teaching at the school, one of the things I tried to always tell students there, I go, look, you're in my painting class, and that's great, and I'm going to teach you everything I know about painting. But if you ever have an opportunity, maybe somebody needs an apprentice at a wood shop, or somebody who's got a metal sculptor that needs somebody to help out, or like, go learn that stuff. Like, learn as much as you can about how to use your hands and mind to make things, like be a maker of things, whether it's exactly what you want to do, or it's something that you go, well, it's still creative. It's not exactly what I want to do, but it will allow me to continue to live a creative life. So the more skills any artist can develop, the more likelihood that they'll survive being creative versus having to support themselves through a job that you go into. So
that's great advice. And so, like, what's your perfect, like, what are you envisioning for, keeping, Laguna somewhat not like the 60s, but then again, like, a present day artist community?
So one thing that has happened because of the demographics and the affordability issues, it's that we don't have, like when I came here in my 20s, I could afford to be here and work here. If you're in your 20s now, unless you have, come from a very wealthy family or whatever, and you're a creative person, you can't, there's no place for you here. You can't afford it, and that to me is sort of right down at the core of what we need to deal with right now in terms of maintaining a really vital, and when I say creative community, that's encompasses musicians and writers and performers and fine artists and craftsmen. So it's sort of the overarching word I use to describe everybody who is either a maker or creative person in some regard, musician, whatever. So I think the big issue is, we don't need to look in the rearview mirror. Like what happened in the 60s was unique to that time. 70s, you can go through every decade and go, things evolve, things change, sometimes for the better, sometimes not so much, but I don't think there's an idealized time that you can point to and go, I wish Laguna could be that always. Like we have to live and work in the times that we are in. And now, at the first quarter of the 21st century, it's a different time, and there's a lot more population in Orange County, especially right over the hill here. We have a lot more traffic, a lot more tourism, and the community's gotten expensive. So I think we need to look at first of all, we need to define what we want to be. Like, do we want to continue to hold on to this moniker of being an art colony? Because if that's really something that's important to us, we can't look at the facade of the art colony. When I talk about that, I'm talking about, we have a museum, we have an art school, we have a playhouse, we have 3 festivals, we have other performing groups that are well established here. However, when you sort of go underneath the surface of that facade, what is it that really makes it soulful and real is the real working artists, craftsmen, performers, musicians. That's what keeps it vital. I mean, you can have all the trappings of it, but if there's nothing underneath that, then it's just a hollow shell. So, and that's part of the reason I got involved with the city is to try to at least keep that in the forefront of the conversation.
Well, wow. I learned a lot about you.
Yeah, well, I learned a lot about myself too by having to sort of talk about my experiences.
Right.
And I still hope to have more,
Of course, you will, for sure.
I learn stuff all the time that I learn stuff every year that I didn't know before, and then I don't necessarily become an expert at anything, but I learn enough about it that allows me to do those things, So, like I say, it's sort of that journeyman idea of I can do stuff with my hands and my brain, and it's allowed me to continue to lead what I consider a pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you.
Excited to see what you do next.
Well, hopefully there's more.
Right, there's more to come. Yeah. Well, thank you, George.
Okay. Well.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. So thanks for doing this.